The porch was tidy, a few flower pots vacant for the winter, and a small porch swing swayed gently in the wind. I must admit I was nervous as I turned to see the gravel road winding through the hills. My house was nearly 15 acres away from my closest neighbor, whose door I was standing in front of. After all, country life was new to me. I gently knocked on the door, the sound of a television coming from the other side. I waited a moment, but no one replied. As I turned, I saw an old Silverado, its red paint dusted with a light gray layer of gravel. I knocked again and waited patiently, but after a minute, I turned and began walking down the stairs. "Can I help you, fella?" I heard behind me as the door creaked open slightly. I turned back around to see a man with graying hair and a mustache peering out from behind horn-rimmed glasses. His eyes were a nearly wooden brown. "Hey there, my name is Jake," I said awkwardly. "I'm your new neighbor who moved in a couple of weeks ago, and I was just wondering if I could ask a favor." "And what might that be?" "I just ran out of sugar. I was wondering if I could borrow a cup just to use in my coffee." "Whole lot of sugar for a cup of coffee, I'd say," he replied with a slight, unapproving frown. "You'd be fixin' to bounce off the damn pastures with that much sugar." I chuckled nervously. "Well, I'm not going to use the whole thing on my coffee, just enough to get me by until I get to town to buy some." "You gonna bring me a cup and a half back?" he asked, stepping out onto the porch and locking eyes with me. Taller than me and built like a barrel, he wore thick denim jeans and an even thicker green and black flannel shirt. Confused by his response, I shrugged, searching for the right words. "A cup and a half? You know, it's charging interest," he answered. "That's usually how stuff works when you borrow, you know." "Well, I guess borrowing was a poor choice of word," I corrected. "Could I have a cup of sugar, please?" The man grunted. He took a step forward, his gaze intense. I offered a gentle smile, hoping to disarm him. He tilted his head back and let out a hearty laugh that echoed around us. "I'm just joshin' you, man," he chuckled. "Come on in and let's get you a cup of sugar. Can't have any man starting their day without coffee." "Thanks, sir," I replied. "What's your name, by the way?" "I'm Jebediah, but most people just call me Jeb," he responded, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "Pleasure to meet you, Jake." "Likewise." "All right, come on in and let's get you fixed up," he said, gesturing for me to follow him inside. As I walked through the door, I noticed the wood-paneled walls were adorned with various hunting trophies, and the wooden furniture featured taxidermied wild animals. "Don't worry, they don't bite," Jeb chuckled, noticing my stare at his collection. "I've lived here almost my entire life." "You knew who owned my house before me?" "Yes, sir. Maud Bell. She was an odd duck." "Oh, yeah." "She wasn't very neighborly," Jeb replied as we walked into his meticulously clean kitchen, with 4 plates perfectly staged on the table. "We talked a few times, but I miss the days when people were neighborly, you know. I wish I could say I did, but I'm from the city," I replied as he searched through a cabinet of labeled mason jars, pulling out one filled with white sugar. "Didn't even really know my neighbors." "That's a damn shame. I remember growing up, stuff like this happened all the time." "Like what?" "This right here, a neighbor coming over for a cup of sugar or asking for some eggs." "Yeah, never much of that where I grew up," I admitted. Even growing up, I hardly knew my neighbors. "Simpler times, I guess," Jeb added as he filled a smaller mason jar with sugar for me, carefully avoiding spilling any on his counter. "So, what brought you to live down this way?" "Well, I work remotely, so I figured I'd get out of the city to somewhere more affordable and settle down." "What do you do?" "IT project management." "Oh, one of them computer guys," Jeb chortled. "I don't know much about all that fancy tech stuff. I still use an old flip phone." "Nothing wrong with retro sometimes," I said, as I looked around Jeb's kitchen and saw a couple of guns sitting next to his back door, a rifle and a shotgun. Sometimes I'd forget where I moved, and this was totally normal. So it's just you in the house? Jeb turned with a jar full of sugar in his hand and nodded. Yep, the kids are all grown up now, and the wife ran off a few years back. Oh, I'm sorry to hear. Don't be. I'm better off without her nagging my ear off. Women, you know. Jeb chuckled again. You live by yourself, right? Yeah, I said, slightly caught off guard by his assumption as he handed me the cup of sugar. It was more than a cup. Thanks, Jeb. No problem, that's what good neighbors do. The only sound was the clicking of my keyboard when I heard a faint knock at the front door. I continued typing, hoping to get the last email sent off, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent, and finally aggressive. 1 second, I'm coming, I shouted. Hitting enter to send the email, it must have been the 30th time I'd hit send, but the knocking stopped before I reached the door. As I opened it, I saw Jeb marching angrily over to an ATV and retrieving a shotgun. He pointed it in the air, pulled the trigger, and a boom erupted across the air. What the hell? I screamed, startled. Jeb, who had noticed me at the door, grinned widely. He placed the gun on the ATV and shuffled over to me. That's called a holler doorbell, he explained. Okay, I've never heard of that, I replied, but I would appreciate it if you didn't do that. His grin vanished, replaced by a blank expression. How was I supposed to get your attention then? He asked bluntly. The knock got my attention, I said. I was on my way to the door. I was just in my office. I saw your car, figured you were home, he stated, standing inches from me, peering into my doorway. Sorry, I know you're new around here. I didn't think it through. It's okay, I guess, I said. So, what's up, Jeb? I was just wondering if you have a stick of butter, he asked, his gleeful grin returning. My nerves, however, were still a little rattled. Mind if I borrow some? Are you going to bring a stick and quarter next time? I awkwardly tried to joke. He looked at me in silence for almost 10 seconds, but then his head tilted back and he laughed loudly, even harder than the time he used the same joke. Good one, sir. All right, let's get you a stick of butter, I replied, starting to feel a little more at ease as I walked inside. Jeb followed his eyes darting back and forth as if he was soaking in my house. Really, gave this place a facelift, didn't you? Yeah, I've owned it for a couple months before I moved in, I answered as we walked through the house towards the kitchen. It just needed a little modernizing, you know? By golly, it almost feels like I walked into the future, Jeb chortled, as the two of us stepped into my kitchen. As I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a stick of butter, handing it over to him. Nothing too fancy, I assure you, I said, while handing him the stick of butter. He continued to scan everything around him silently as held onto the butter. So, got any plans for the weekend? Just gonna be watching college games. Ah, are your kids coming over? He sneered and said, They don't come around, Jake. Oh, sorry, I just thought. Why would you bring that up? He asked coldly, his face blank. Do I ask you about your dumb family? Excuse me? Sorry, I shouldn't have said that, he replied, his grin returning, though it felt unnerving. All right. Well, I am sorry if it feels like I am rushing you out the door, I replied, but I have to get back to work. I get it. You got to get back to that fancy Moon Man job, Jeb said with a hearty laugh. Thanks for the butter, neighbor. It's no problem, I said, as we walked to the front door. He patted me on the back a couple of times, but something about his eyes when he did it was off, as if he was wishing he was slapping me. All right, I will see you around sometime. Yay, see you around, I said nervously, as I watched him walk down to his ATV. He turned around one last time, giving a big wave with an even bigger smile before mounting his vehicle and revving the engine loudly. I wasn't sleeping well. The sound of ATV engines and wheels kept creeping into my dreams, waking me up. My phone displayed 3:45 a.m. I got out of bed, turning on the light before heading downstairs for a glass of water. I hoped hydrating would allow me to fall back asleep. As I returned to my bedroom, I debated for a moment whether to go back to sleep or simply start my day early. As I walked over to my window, I gazed out at the scenery. It was an adjustment from city life, but I was slowly starting to appreciate the quiet. However, that appreciation was brief as I scanned the field and saw something in the distance. There, standing in the pasture, sitting on an ATV and looking directly at my window was Jeb. What the fuck? I quickly turned off my light to feign sleep, but I could hear it. Maybe it wasn't a dream. Could Jeb have been circling my property with his ATV all night? No, that's crazy. But so is sitting in a field at 3:45 a.m.? It was a faint but slow rumble in the distance as I stood frozen in the dark bedroom. It inched closer, each second sending a thudding tremor through my chest. Before I knew it, I heard a knock at the door. A few seconds later, another knock, this time heavier and more aggressive. Maybe he'll think I'm asleep? No, I'm an idiot for even thinking that. He's clearly unhinged. I needed to call the cops, but I didn't want him to see me move, so I did the only thing that came to mind. I crawled, the knocking growing angrier and louder, slowly inching on my knees towards my nightstand to reach my phone. Then came the loud bang. I was stiffly on my hands and knees as glass rained down on me. I looked up to see my bedroom window shattered from the shotgun blast. "Oh, looks like my late-night doorbell might have been a little off-center," Jeb yelled with his hearty laugh. "You blew out my fucking window," I yelled back. "So you are awake?" "Anyone would be awake with an ATV drive-by." "Suppose you're right about that," Jeb responded. "You think I can grab a beer?" "No, it's almost 4 in the morning." "Well, I was going to do some smoke and takes about 12 hours. "I don't fucking care," I screamed. "You shot my window out and I am calling the cops." It was silent for a moment, giving me the slight bit of hope that my threat to call the police would make him go away. But after another one of his laughs, Jeb said, "That's not very neighborly of you to call the cops." "You shot my window out," I yelled, crawling over to where my phone lay and beginning to dial 911. "Seriously, Jeb, go home and wait for the cops there." "You know how far out we are?" Jeb responded with a cold tone. "We are about 45 minutes away from town. And if you're lucky, just maybe they have a trooper stationed down at the exit. But around this time, he's usually at the bookies watching YouTube videos and eating jerky." "Jeb, I am calling them now," I yelled one more time, but was greeted not by a response but another shotgun blast that shattered the remaining window frame. "I just need a beer, Jake," Jeb screamed. "Hell, I'll even bring you a platter of what I'm smoking." "I don't have any beer." "What kind of man lives in the country and doesn't have beer?" "Me, this guy, the one who had his window shot out and is about to call the cops." "I don't believe you," he shouted. "No, I am actually calling the cops," I shouted back. "Not about that," Jeb hurled back. "About the beer, I know you got one in the fridge." "What? I want to see for myself," Jeb screamed. "I want to know if you are just lying and not being a good neighbor." "I am not letting you in," I countered loudly. Fear gripped me as I heard an ATV engine roar to life. Peeking out the window, I braced myself for the worst. Jeb was revving his engine. He launched himself towards my house and a tremendous thud shook the front door. I knew I had to get out and quickly. I ran downstairs and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice crackled. My neighbor. He's trying to break into my house with his ATV. He's been shooting at me. I screamed, the sound of the engine deafening as Jeb rammed the front door. The wood splintered, and the frame groaned under the pressure from the ATV. Sir, are you somewhere safe? The operator asked. No, he's trying to break in. Sir, try to find a safe place. I am dispatching someone now, the operator replied. I fled towards the kitchen, past the refrigerator and towards the back door, desperate to escape my own home from Jeb. It was frigid outside, but I heard the front door finally succumb to the constant assault as I scrambled further into the biting cold. I had to escape. I started running towards the edge of my property, but then I heard Jeb shout, "You were right, you didn't have any beer." I turned to see him standing at my back door, but all I could do was run. My ribs ached with every pounding step, but the sickening roar of the ATV grew louder. Horror gripped me as I saw Jeb approaching, his face a mask of grim determination. "I'm gonna get ya," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the pastures and woods. "I called the cops," I shouted back, but my words seemed to only fuel his pursuit. He slowed momentarily, as if toying with me, before unleashing the ATV again. I could hear his manic laughter in the distance. "All right, this time I'm really gonna get ya." The engine roared, propelling him forward with renewed speed. I pushed myself harder, my eyes fixed on the creek embankment, my last hope of escape. "You think you can get away?" Jeb shouted, his face inches from mine as we raced side by side. "Don't you know what it's like to be a good neighbor?" He stared at me, then swerved his head, realizing we were both heading towards the creek bed. Panic flared in his eyes. He slammed on the brakes, attempting a sharp turn, but the ATV flipped, throwing Jeb off as it barrel-rolled several times into the field. I stopped running, my sides burning. An eerie silence descended, broken only by the distant wail of approaching sirens. A loud moan pierced the air. I approached Jeb, who laid on the ground, his head bleeding profusely, his legs twisted in unnatural ways. A chilling grin spread across his face. "Be a good neighbor now," he groaned, "and call an ambulance." And that concludes tonight's story. How to be a good neighbor. Sometimes the scariest horrors are hiding just next door. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Jeb's twisted version of neighborly love. Until next time, stay safe and keep an eye on your neighbors.